in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, was a center, a teeming center of Jewish life. And today it looks like a war zone. It is a heavily, heavily depressed neighborhood. And Mom, you remember we walked through the streets and he's showing us these buildings, shuls, schools that have been lost to the Jewish community. And he took us to see, in the first few months that he was in Chicago, before the yeshiva inexplicably moved over Pesach vacation, no one told him, so he came back to find an empty building and somehow find this new mysterious place called Skokie. A few years ago, at one of the family bar mitzvahs in St. Louis, he took us around the similar kind of tour in St. Louis. And on his desk, he had I think it was on a Post-it, yeah? There's a Post-it on, my father always had calendars on his desk. He had a Post-it on the calendar that he wanted to take my brother and I both back to St. Louis to show us around, to see all the old places. It's a trip that we will never take together. And the truth is, and this was alluded to before, I think David mentioned it, that even when it came to baseball, and you should know one of the great tragedies of my father's life was his complete and utter failure to interest me at all in sports. That even when it came to baseball, my father's interest fused this kind of historical perspective, this rootedness in the past. The last Shabbos that my father had before his fall last April was spent at our house. It happened to be the Shabbos he was there. I did something a little bit different in the shiur that I give on Shabbos afternoon, where I decided to trace the history of the halachic system, of how, kind of the Jewish version of how a bill becomes a law, of how something moves from the Gemara, through the Rishonim, through the medieval sages, the Rambam, the Beis Yosef, the Tur, the Shulchan Aruch, finally to the Aruch HaShulchan, the Mishnah Berurah, to talk about the different texts, when they were written, why they were written, how they differ from each other. And he was so excited. And he told me afterwards, he said every yeshiva should have a class like this. People pick up books, they don't know what they are, where they come from. That's what spoke to him. Historical man is rooted in the past. But the truth is, my father loved as much the present or the presence that he lived in. You know, this gene, this love of history is something which has been passed on in our family. So my son Chasky, who's 7 years old, for the last, 2 years, has been fixated on history. Chasky loves history. So last year, Chasky wrote a poem. The poem goes like this. Remember, he's 7. He said, if we lived in times that were historical, it would be a miracle. Some people would think it's hysterical, but I know that it's a miracle. Chasky's very forceful about pretty much everything. My father always knew the times he lived in were historical and were a miracle. My father he was obsessed with the news. We got dozens of periodicals to the house. Newspapers, Jewish, general. I don't know when he read all of these things, but it was unbelievable the amount of news that this man would go through. Because he felt that we lived in times that were historical. And in fact, in the last years of his life, that's what he taught in Temple University. He taught about the history, particularly of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people, in his lifetime. That's what he loved. He taught about the Holocaust. As we mentioned, he was born, my grandparents, my mother's parents, were inmates in Plaszów in Poland at the time. He was born, blessed to be in St. Louis, but he embraced their story as his own. My father went on a trip to Poland in the late 80s when the Iron Curtain was first shifting. And I remember when he came back and the pictures, I think there were still slides in those days, how animated he was about going back to Poland. he was throughout his life fascinated and haunted by the Holocaust. Remember, any discussion, particularly I remember at the Seder, any time we would talk about any notion of the historical fate of the Jewish people, reward and punishment, that the ghost of the Holocaust was always there. My father was palpably aware of the miracle of living parallel to the state of Israel, to living in a time where redemption was in the air. You know, it's interesting, I saw in my parents' wedding album that their wedding invitation was dated, besides the usual year, the Anno Mundi, the year traditionally attributed to creation, it also included the fact that it was the 27th year of the State of Israel. My father was there when the Camp David Accords were signed in 1978 at the White House. He was a guest of the Carter administration and of the Bush administration. But I think the historical times that he lived in that spoke the most to him was the astounding story of American Jewry, the story of success, the story of how starving, struggling immigrants succeeded by anyone's wildest dream, how proud he was to see David at the Supreme Court, to be invited to the White House. But above and beyond the general story of American Jewry, the story that I think was one of the most powerful ones, closest to his heart, and the one that underlay every speech he gave at every simcha, was the unbelievable, unprecedented resurgence of Orthodox Judaism in the 20th century. And while he was someone who abhorred triumphalism, the story of the day school movement, how in a community of people who wanted to become Americans, some brave people invested in their children the idea that America is no different, that the Torah of Sinai and of the Talmud of the Shulchan Aruch is relevant in 20th century Midwestern America. He told us that story over and over and over again. And that was the story that forged him. He used to talk to me all the time that when he was a kid, the only thing he could get in English was the Silberman Chumash and the Sansino Talmud. And today, the dizzying array of Torah literature in English. He was fascinated by all streams of the Jewish world, and particularly the Orthodox world. I looked last summer, he sent me a series of emails. He had tickets. He went to the Siyum HaShas to go to see 90,000 Jews get together to celebrate learning the Babylonian Talmud. And the last email was titled, and he, in the last years, both embraced email but never quite figured his way around it. Sent an email titled to a bunch of, some of you I think were probably recipients, the Siyum was a totally amazing, in big capital letters, totally amazing experience. He was so excited, the idea of all these Jews coming together in an arena to celebrate Torah. And if he had like a scorecard, to follow along the last few, over the last few years on Thanksgiving, a number of times my father would say to me, we should go after Thanksgiving dinner, we should go check out the Aguda convention. Now, neither my father or I are Agudistan, but we actually went one year. We went undercover because he got such a kick out of this. To wander around looking at the success of Jews in America. He used to love to go shopping in Muncie or Lakewood for food, for the different kinds of Hamish foods that he liked, many of which are still archived in our garage. He used to tell me that when he was a kid in St. Louis, on maybe one Saturday night, 2 Saturday nights before Pesach, there was a store that brought in whatever kosher products were available back then. And the owner would get up with a megaphone and would be yelling about the different kinds of stuff that was available. Now, for the first time, 2 flavors of macaroons this year. And now you walk into a supermarket in Muncie, it's unbelievable. I was thinking the last few weeks when the Pew report came out in American Cherry, how much he would love to dissect it, to talk about it, to analyze the implications. Historical man reveres the past, marvels at the present. And now our family faces a premature future without him. In the last 6 months, we got a bitter taste of this. We went through Ricky's birth, Dovi's bris, and Yehuda's upsharon with a palpable absence. I don't think my mother knows this. Last winter, Saturday night, Chasky and I go to father-son learning, and Chasky was so proud that he went through all of Parshas Shmos. He read every word, every pasuk in Parshas Shmos, and we worked on it. And he even had a little notebook that I bought him on my last trip to Israel where he would write down all the good questions. So we're going to make a siyum, his first siyum. And he said he wants Grandpa to be there. So you were supposed to come to us the Shabbos before Shavuos, and that was going to be Chasky siyum on Parshas Shmos. Never happened. He will never physically be present at bar and bat mitzvahs. He will never again stand under a chuppah. He will never hold a great-grandchild. And yet, as mentioned before, there is a pasuk that he would quote as the compliment to Zechor Yemos Olam, the words of Koheles, V'achud HaMeshulash, Lo v'mheira yinasek, that a cord made of 3 plies does not quickly unravel. He was privileged to see a 3rd generation carrying forward the precious Mesorah of his mother and grandmother. We had him with us. He went to siddur parties. He was there for kiddushes for his granddaughters. He was at the brisses. He named Chasky and he named Yehuda. So our task now is to let him gather nachas from his lichtige Gan Eden, the illuminated place that his neshama is journeying to. We need to transmit those memories and those traditions forward. Memories, how he would sit at the head of the Seder table in his kittel, and for many years he had a very, very simple kittel. He upgraded the last couple of years to a nicer one. That was a kittel he only wore at the Seder. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, he had like a fancy robe that he wore in shul. But the kittel from his wedding, the very simple kittel, is what he wore at the Seder, and he would sit there, and he had his wine-stained 40, 50-year-old Migdal Eder Haggadah with the notes in the margins. And like he was the king. I remember as a child sitting next to him on the couch. We used to learn together Friday nights. I don't remember everything, but I know we learned Sefer Shoftim, and we learned Mishnayos and Maseches Bikurim, and we learned Hamafkid, the 3rd parak in Bav Metzia. That the Chud HaMeshulash, that the 3rd generation will find themselves ennobled by my father's legacy. To be rooted and to revere the past, to be filled with wonder at the present that they get to live in. May we merit to see that our past and present culminate in the fulfillment of the prophecy, Bila Hamaves La Netzach, U'Malcha Hashem Elokim Dima Me'al Kol Panim, that a day will come when death will be swallowed forever, and God will erase the tears that flow so freely now from the faces of all humanity. Zehei Nishmaso Tzor V'Tzor Achayim. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. In a moment, we'll ask our cousin, Dr. Abe Cherrick, to say the Kel Malei for my father, after which we will escort the coffin to the hearse to at least have a partial fulfillment of the mitzvah of Levaya, of accompanying, as someone accompanies a loved one out of their home, to accompany my father's physical remains on their last journey. And we would ask at the end for the following people to step up as pallbearers to escort the Aron: my cousin Ari, my uncle Stuart, my uncle Chaim, my cousin Ellie, my cousin Norman, and my cousin Abe, to walk together with my father on this last journey, and again for everyone to follow as well. The burial will be tomorrow night in Israel, in Beit Shemesh, in the Eretz HaChaim Cemetery. We will return for Shiva Thursday morning at my brother's home in Teaneck. We will be in Teaneck until Tuesday afternoon. Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning, we will be back here in Philadelphia for the local community to join with us. And again, all of those details are available. Abe.
Amishkavo, v'namah.